Imagine holding a winning lottery ticket, but to cash it in, you have to walk into a cage with a starving lion and ask politely for your money. That is the exact level of sheer, unadulterated delusion a low-level Chicago street hustler possessed when he picked up a telephone and decided to extort the most terrifying criminal mastermind in American history. He had stumbled upon a secret. It was a dangerous, highly sensitive piece of leverage that belonged to the Chicago outfit, and in his incredibly flawed, greedy mind, he calculated that this secret was worth exactly $10,000. He thought he was a genius who had finally found the ultimate shortcut to wealth. He believed he had hacked the system and backed the mob into a corner where they had no choice but to pay him off quietly. He did not realize that the moment he made that demand, he ceased to be a living, breathing human being. In the eyes of the underworld, he became a dead man walking, and his execution would not be a simple bullet in the dark. The Chicago outfit did not just want to silence him, they wanted to turn his absolute arrogance into a monument of psychological terror. They were going to trap him inside his own mistake, but the horrifying reality of how they executed this punishment would remain a dark legend on the streets for decades. To understand why a man would be foolish enough to sign his own death warrant for a measly $10,000, and why the outfit's response was so breathtakingly cruel, you have to understand the apex predator he decided to poke. The man at the top of the food chain was Antonino Accardo, known to the public as Tony, and known to his closest associates as Joe Batters. If you were to ask the average person to name a famous mobster, they would likely say Al Capone or John Gotti. Those men sought the spotlight. They loved the cameras, the expensive tailored suits, and the dangerous celebrity status that came with their crimes. Tony Accardo viewed that kind of behavior as the ultimate weakness. He was the ghost of Chicago. While Capone died a broken man and Gotti spent his final years rotting in a federal prison, Accardo ruled the most violent, sprawling criminal syndicate in the United States for over 50 years and never spent a single night in a jail cell. He was a master of absolute insulation. He built an empire that generated millions of dollars a week through illegal casinos, underground lotteries, union control, and vast extortion networks, yet his name was never on a single piece of paper. He communicated in whispers. He gave orders through a labyrinth of underbosses and capos so deeply layered that law enforcement could never trace a crime back to his living room. Accardo was a chess grandmaster playing against checkers players. He did not rule through loud, chaotic violence, but through the terrifying certainty of cold, efficient consequences. When a problem arose, Accardo did not throw a tantrum. He simply nodded his head, and the problem vanished from the face of the earth, leaving behind no witnesses, no weapon, and no body. This was the quiet, untouchable titan that a desperate, small-time hustler decided to target. The hustler was everything Accardo was not. He was loud, careless, and driven by the immediate gratification of a quick score. He survived in the grim underbelly of the city by running petty scams, skimming off the top of illegal poker games, and constantly looking over his shoulder for men he owed money to. He was a bottom feeder in an ocean of sharks. But somehow, through a twist of fate that he tragically mistook for good luck, this amateur stumbled upon something he was never meant to see. The exact nature of the leverage he found has been debated by underworld historians for years. Some say he acquired a detailed ledger from a careless bookmaker that mapped out the outfit's payoffs to corrupt city judges. Others believe he intercepted a package containing sensitive photographs of an outfit captain meeting with a high-ranking politician. Whatever the item was, it was highly compromising. It was the kind of evidence that could trigger a massive federal investigation and disrupt the quiet, highly profitable operations that Accardo had spent decades perfecting. The hustler looked at this evidence and saw a blank check. But his vision was entirely clouded by his desperation. He failed to comprehend the fundamental law of the Chicago underworld. You cannot negotiate with a machine designed to crush you. The sheer audacity of the demand is almost comical in its stupidity. $10,000 was a microscopic sum of money to the Chicago outfit. Accardo's men routinely spent that amount on a weekend trip to Las Vegas, or on bribes just to keep a single illicit warehouse operating for a month. The money itself was entirely irrelevant. The true crime, the unforgivable sin, was the disrespect. To allow a street-level nobody to dictate terms to the Chicago outfit was impossible. If Accardo paid the $10,000, word would inevitably leak onto the streets. It would signal to every other desperate criminal in the city that the outfit was soft, that they could be squeezed, that their secrets were a commodity that could be bought and sold by amateurs. Accardo understood that power is a fragile illusion that must be maintained with absolute uncompromising terror. The hustler had to be eliminated, but a simple shooting was not enough. A bullet is fast, a bullet is forgettable. Accardo wanted an execution that would be whispered about in every dark corner of Chicago, a punishment so uniquely horrifying that no one would ever dare to utter a threat against his family again. The hustler, completely oblivious to the gears turning against him, made his move. He likely used a public payphone, his hands trembling, with a mixture of fear and extreme arrogance, to contact a mid-level associate known to operate in his neighborhood. He laid out his cards, he explained what he had, and he issued his ultimatum. $10,000 in unmarked bills, or the evidence goes straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. After he hung up the phone, he likely felt a massive rush of adrenaline. He probably went to a bar, ordered an expensive drink, and celebrated his own imagined brilliance. He thought he had outsmarted the mafia. In reality, the associate who took that phone call didn't even break a sweat. He simply passed the message up the chain of command, layer by layer, until it reached the quiet, heavily guarded men who sat in Tony Accardo's inner circle. The response was immediate, calculated, and devoid of any emotion. The outfit agreed to the terms. They told the hustler he had won. They arranged a time and a place for the exchange. This is the psychological brilliance of the mob trap. They never let you know you are a target. They feed your ego. They gave the hustler a false sense of absolute security. They agreed to his price so quickly that he probably regretted not asking for $50,000. The meeting was set for a late Tuesday night. The location was far away from the bustling downtown core, out in a desolate, sprawling industrial sector, bordering the rail yards. It was a landscape of rusting shipping containers, abandoned factories, and deep, suffocating shadows. The hustler was told to drive his own car, park near a specific set of unused train tracks, and wait for a black sedan to arrive with the briefcase full of cash. He was told to come alone, a rule he eagerly followed because he had no intention of splitting his newfound fortune with anyone. As the night approached, the hustler prepared for his moment of triumph. He got into his vehicle, an older model sedan, and drove out toward the industrial yards. The streets grew darker and emptier the further he drove from the city lights. When he finally pulled into the designated area, the silence was heavy and absolute. He parked his car exactly where he was told. He kept the engine running, the heater fighting against the cold Chicago night, and he stared out into the darkness, waiting for his money. He probably checked his watch a dozen times. He imagined the briefcase. He imagined the look on the gangster's face as he handed over the cash to a guy they probably despised. He felt powerful. He felt completely in control. He had absolutely no idea that dozens of eyes were already watching him from the deep shadows of the abandoned factories, waiting for the perfect moment to spring the trap. Suddenly the darkness was broken. but it was not a single black sedan pulling up to hand over a briefcase. Several heavy, dark vehicles emerged silently from the alleys and side streets, moving with the terrifying, synchronized precision of a military unit. Before the hustler could even shift his car into gear, the vehicles converged on him, boxing his sedan in completely from the front, the back, and the sides. The heavy steel bumpers of the mob cars pressed right up against his vehicle, trapping him in a tight, inescapable gridlock. The hustler's heart must have stopped. The illusion of control vanished in a split second, replaced by a wave of cold, paralyzing panic. He slammed his hand down on the door locks, a pathetic, primal instinct to protect himself. He stared through his windows as large, imposing figures stepped out of the surrounding vehicles. They were dressed in heavy coats, their faces obscured by the shadows. They did not draw weapons. They did not yell commands or demand the evidence. They simply walked to the perimeter of his trapped car and stood there, staring at him through the glass. The hustler was breathing heavily, his mind racing for a way out, but his car was wedged so tightly he couldn't move an inch. He expected them to smash the windows. He expected them to drag him out into the cold night and beat him to death. But the men of the Chicago outfit did not move toward the glass. Instead, they walked to the trunks of their own vehicles and pulled out heavy industrial equipment. Through the dim light, the hustler watched in absolute confusion as they rolled out large, heavy metal cylinders. He saw thick rubber hoses. He saw the men strapping heavy, dark welding masks over their faces. And then the true, mind-bending horror of the situation finally clicked in his brain. With a sharp, terrifying hiss, the industrial blowtorches ignited. Brilliant, blinding blue flames erupted in the darkness, casting monstrous, dancing shadows across the rusted metal of the junkyard. The hustler screamed, but the sound was trapped inside his own vehicle. The executioners stepped forward, not with guns, but with fire. They moved to the doors of the hustler's sedan. They pressed the tips of the blazing blue torches directly against the seams where the doors met the frame of the car. The intense, localized heat was astronomical. Sparks showered violently into the night air. The hustler watched in absolute paralyzed terror as the metal of his own car began to glow bright orange, then white hot. They were not trying to break into the car, they were sealing it shut. The noise was deafening, a relentless mechanical roar of burning gas and melting steel. The executioners moved with methodical, terrifying efficiency. They dragged the torches down the length of the door seams, fusing the heavy steel of the doors directly to the chassis. They moved to the back doors, then to the passenger side, leaving heavy, unbreakable beads of melted metal in their wake. Inside the car, the environment rapidly transformed into a waking nightmare. The heat radiating through the doors became unbearable. The interior temperature skyrocketed. The hustler frantically rolled up his windows, terrified that the sparks and flames would enter the cabin. But by doing so, he sealed his own fate completely. The smell of scorching paint, melting rubber seals, and burning plastic filled the small, airtight space. He pounded his fists against the reinforced glass, screaming for mercy, begging them to take the evidence, screaming that he didn't want the money anymore. But the men in the welding masks could not hear him, and even if they could, they did not care. They were simply doing a job, executing an order from Tony Accardo with the cold detachment of factory workers on an assembly line. They welded the trunk shut, they welded the hood shut, they ensured that every possible point of entry or exit was fused together with solid steel. They turned his vehicle into a custom-made airtight coffin, and then, as quickly as they had arrived, the torches were extinguished. The blinding blue light vanished, plunging the junkyard back into darkness. The men removed their masks, packed their heavy cylinders back into their trunks, and climbed into their vehicles. They slowly reversed away from the hustler's car, leaving it sitting alone in the center of the desolate lot. They drove away without ever speaking a single word to him. This is where the true, unimaginable torture began, and this is the secondary horror that makes this story so uniquely terrifying. The outfit did not kill him quickly. They left him perfectly unharmed, sitting in the driver's seat of his own car, but he was trapped inside a solid block of steel. As the taillights of the mob cars faded into the distance, the hustler was left entirely alone in the suffocating silence. He was alive, but he was already buried. He threw his entire body weight against the doors, kicking and shoving with the frantic strength of a dying animal, but the industrial welds held firm. The doors were fused to the frame, the windows, older and incredibly difficult to break without a heavy tool, mocked him. He had nothing inside the cabin to smash the glass. He was sitting in a perfectly sealed environment, and the terrifying reality of physics began to set in. With the engine off and the air vents sealed by the warped, melted plastic from the torches, the oxygen supply inside the cabin was strictly limited. Every panicked breath he took, every scream he let out into the empty night, depleted the very air he needed to survive. He was forced to sit in the pitch black, surrounded by the toxic smell of burnt paint, listening to his own rapid heartbeat, knowing with absolute certainty that no one was coming to save him. He was parked in an abandoned industrial sector where no one would walk past for days, maybe weeks. The $10,000 he had demanded was a ghost, a foolish fantasy that had led him directly into a slow, agonizing descent into madness. The psychological torment of those final hours is impossible to fully comprehend. He had to sit in the dark, watching the windows fog up from his own frantic breathing, feeling the air grow thin and heavy, realizing that he had constructed his own tomb through sheer arrogance. It was an execution designed not just to end a life, but to send a chilling, undeniable message to anyone who might ever think about crossing the Chicago outfit. When the authorities eventually found the car weeks later, tucked away in the forgotten corner of the rail yards, they were entirely baffled. They found a vehicle that had been completely sealed shut from the outside. They had to call in the fire department with heavy industrial cutting saws just to slice through the roof of the car to access the interior. What they found inside was the tragic, suffocating end of a man who thought he could outsmart the ghost of Chicago. There were no bullet holes, there was no blood. There was only the grim reality of a man who had slowly run out of air, trapped behind steering wheel of a car he could never leave. The story of the Welded car spread through the underworld like wildfire. It became a dark legend, a cautionary tale whispered in dive bars and illegal gambling dens. It solidified Tony Accardo's reputation as a man whose vengeance was not just violent, but profoundly creative and psychologically devastating. The hustler thought he was playing a simple game of extortion, treating the mob like a bank he could rob with a phone call. He failed to realize that the Chicago outfit did not operate on the rules of business. They operated on the rules of absolute terror. He asked for $10,000, and in return, the outfit gave him an eternity to sit in the dark and think about exactly why you never, ever try to hold up the devil.